Greetings, YouTube. I am a person of habits. I always have been. But when I lived alone in the past, it was very easy to fall into behavioral ruts. You get up at the same time every day, you go to work at the same time every day, you come home from work at the same time every day, you eat at the same time every day, you do a lot of the same activities by yourself. If you put something down in your apartment when you come home, barring the fact that the cat's moved it, it's where you left it. It's very easy to end up repeating that same day over and over again. When you live with roommates or a partner, or both, I've done all of these things, it adds another level of complexity. Or even if you have something as simple as a dog, which is a much more dynamic animal than in many ways than having a cat, because you have to leave the house with the dog to walk the dog. It throws complexity, and it involves a great deal more of outside influence that I, the person living alone, didn't have to deal with. Suddenly, things are going on that I did not plan, did not have control over, and cannot have any control over. All I can do is react to them and adapt myself to the situation. So why am I telling you this? This is sort of what you have to do when you're running a low player game. Let's say if it's only 1 or 2 people. Now for me, the sweet spot in a game is 3 to 5 players. That's about where I want. I think more than 5 players and things just get unwieldy, and fewer than 3 players and things can get very samey, just like living alone could get very routine. This is a question, essentially, someone has asked me, Bash BizNet, I believe it is, concerning a Cyberpunk 2020 game he's trying to run. He's finding that when you're running as a solo game, things can get very much like you're adventuring in a tunnel, because you've only got that one input from that single player, and I can understand that. It's a great deal like a television show or a comic book that only has a single main character. You can get very much that same, what's the hero of the week, what's the villain of the week kind of thing. It gets to be very samey. Whereas if you have an ensemble cast, like, say, Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the Scooby Gang, or Firefly, or the Avengers, or something along those lines, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, it's because there's more people involved, there are far more directions that a writer or a GM can go in, because there's a lot more meat to work with. You're not just dealing with 1 or 2 players and their backstories. You're dealing with 3 to 5 players and all of their backstories and how they interact. Now, it can add complexity that maybe the GM doesn't want sometimes, but it is going to be a source of inspiration as well. So I guess I'm asking the RPG Brigade here on YouTube, how do you avoid that feeling of playing in a tunnel when you're running a game for only 1 or 2 people? Now for me, I suggest you find random generators of information, news items, or just find news items on, online as inspiration. Make sure that they're outside influences. Pets are a good example. The pet makes you go outside. You go outside, you are forced to interact with the outside world. Right there is a means of getting new storylines into the game. You can't just ignore it. Relatives work, jobs work. The job can have you do things that you necessarily wouldn't want to do, but if you want to keep the job, you have to. In a fantasy setting, that can be guilds, or you have a patron. That's always a good job. Oh, I love having patrons in games and fantasy games. That means the player characters are at someone else's command, and so you can make them go do things, at least so long as they wish to continue to have that patron that they themselves wouldn't have necessarily thought of doing on their own. In a science fiction or cyberpunk kind of game, you could have to do the same thing by having them owe someone money, or you could have them be on contract with someone. They owe a debt of gratitude, or they owe a favor. Maybe they have a sibling that is a troublemaker and you're involved because of that. There are ways of pushing the campaign around and still not having it be a railroad. Because you don't want to railroad the person. You want the person to have the sense they can do things. But a single player has less at their disposal than a group of players. What if the player in that solo game isn't the most creative individual? He or she is not taking advantage of all the options in the world around them. Much the same way when I was living alone, I didn't take advantage of all the options available to me. I got into ruts. It's possible. It happens. We're human, and even if you're running a campaign where things are very much not human, science fiction or cyborgs and things like that, the players are human, or in the case of a solo game, player. So I'm looking for inspiration here. I want to know, how do people handle low player campaigns, 1 or 2 people? It adds a level of complexity, I think, that is almost more difficult to handle than a larger group, because there is so much less to work with. You're looking at, when you only have 2 or 3 things on the plate, those things get very important. Now you could have too many things on there, and things get lost. The flavors don't work right, or things get too muddled. But when you're down, it's like sushi. Sushi is an art form. You have very few elements in a sushi roll. You have to make sure you get them right. If you don't, it's a failure. The more complex dishes, because they're more complex, if things are off a little bit here and there, you're less likely to notice. As you have fewer elements in your menu, in your dish, each one becomes more important. And that's the same thing when you have a slow player game. The fewer players you have everything becomes more important that's in front of you, because you can't hide anything. There's less room for fudging, if you will. Whereas in a group with 3 to 5 players, you have more to work with, more complexities, and they will help maybe hide some of the warts and some of the faults of the GM as well, because you've got more player input coming at you. So, I asked the RPG Brigade out there, how do you handle low player campaigns? What secrets do you use to make sure things get dull? Now, let me say, I have run 1-on-1 campaigns. I have run campaigns for 2 players, but none of them have been really long range. They were short range campaigns, that fell sometimes into as low as like the 3 to 10 sessions. So I wasn't looking at having to run this for an open-ended, this is going to run for years kind of thing. Whereas in groups, I have run campaigns for years. Science fiction campaigns for like 3.5 years. And I guess you could say that our AD&D first edition campaign more or less ran for 6. Just rotating GMs and things like that. So how do you keep it fresh? How do you keep things interesting when you may only have 1 or 2 players?